So moved.
And please state your name.
Tim Thompson, Merrimack.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tim. And is there a second?
Ben Frost seconds.
Thank you very much. All in favor, please raise your hand. I think that's a majority, so we're going to say that passed. Thank you. Thank you, Jody, for using the chat. All right, so the next thing on the agenda is the President's Report. So a lot of exciting things happened in 2020, despite it being kind of thrown off kilter with the COVID virus. The Executive Committee, which, a couple slides, next slide, please, which I wanted to thank very much for their hard work today. And here you can see members of the Executive Committee. We all met in January and for our annual retreat, and we usually meet in January, talk about kind of strategy for the next year. We realized we've had a lot of turnover, a lot of burnout, and we realized that there are some positions in this Executive Committee that really were putting in a ton of work, and some positions that maybe were not as defined as they should have been. And so we kind of reworked that, and you saw this in the bylaw amendment that you passed. The professional development position, which was a single person, we really felt needed to be split in two. And that person is responsible for putting together the annual meeting, the annual conference, most often helping out with the NHPA conference, and then any brown bag or legislative seminars that we did as well. And that was a ton of work. And so we split that into two positions, one really dealing with the big conference, and the other one dealing with kind of the smaller annual meeting and some of the brown bags. And our thought process was, hey, let's try these new positions out and see if it works for a few months, maybe for the year of 2020. And if it works, we're going to bring this forward as a bylaw amendment. So one of the other things that we did was take a look at membership. We knew that we really needed to work on membership. We didn't have a position for that, so we created a membership position, and you saw that. And then we really looked hard at our newsletter too. So we had shifted from doing a paper newsletter to a digital newsletter many years ago. That process still seemed to be kind of antiquated, not how people were getting their news and information these days. And so we've shifted that position to a social media position. And I'm actually going to not say any more about that, because I want to talk about that a little bit more in the meeting and really have a dialogue with you. But you know, it was kind of exciting as an executive committee to test out this new structure. And as you saw, it was successful. And so we were able to bring that forward to you this year. So that was in January. COVID started percolating. And as you saw, we had to rapidly shift our spring conference into something virtual. And I think that was a huge success. So again, thanks to Matt and Kyle for making that happen. We did, as I mentioned earlier, we did and continue to see a little bit of turnover with the executive committee. So unfortunately, we had to say goodbye to Scott and Mark this year. And thank you much for both of those folks, for Scott running the legislative committee for the last couple of years, and Mark doing the newsletter. And I know that we are going to be saying goodbye to Carrie and Becky at the end of this term. So thank you very much for those folks as well, for the time that they've put in. And so for the membership, we are looking for new executive committee members. And so if you are interested, please let us know. You'll have seen on the ballot that there were a couple of new folks coming in this year, and we're very excited to work with them, but we will have another vacancy. And so please, if you are interested, please reach out to us and let us know that. Other things that we worked on this year, this was another year transitioning to being a section of NHPA. And so things we worked on were the website, kind of bringing that up to date, getting it integrated in with the NHPA website, the budget. So our budget has shifted a little bit. We now have shared administrative support with NHPA, and so some items in our budget needed to shift a little bit. And then conference help and obviously working with conferences and COVID and things like that was also a shift this year that we had to work with. So as I mentioned, we're looking for new executive committee members. We are always looking for other volunteers. All of our executive committee members are volunteers. Other committees that have openings we always welcome our membership at are things like the legislative subcommittee. And I know the legislative liaison will talk about that in a little bit. That committee looks at New Hampshire-based legislation, and that committee is very active in working with the executive committee to write letters of support or not support for local bills that come through the New Hampshire legislature, really based on planning, zoning, conservation commission, things like that. We also have conference organizing groups or COGs that we are always looking for volunteers for. So again, if you're interested, maybe you don't want to be a full executive committee member, but you're interested in being involved, there are a lot of other ways. So please reach out to any of the membership and let us know that you may have some time that you may be willing to give. We're hoping for all of these changes to really be able to play them out a lot better in 2021. So, and again, we'll talk about kind of the shift from newsletter to social media, but we did not hold a lot of our outreach this year. We really hope to ramp that up next year. And the legislature also was a little wonky this year. And so we were not as active as we typically are. But again, we'll be working on that as well. So we're hoping for a very productive 2021. So thank you all for being here, and I'm going to turn the floor over now to the treasurer, Ben Frost, who's going to talk about this year's budget report.
Thanks, Shannon. As Shannon noted, this is, 2020 is an unusual year in many regards, not the least of which was the budget. So when we get to the spreadsheet, which I think was sent to all of you also as a PDF, you'll see that we really didn't spend much money this year because we made a few choices along the way, like the trio of webinars that replaced our spring conference were free, so that we didn't see expenditures, we didn't see revenues. The revenues that we saw during 2020 was basically from the dues sharing that we are now participating in with the chapter. So each of the 3 states as a section of NHPA will get a share of the dues revenue that goes through APA. And so there's a base rate of $3,000 and a proportional balance based on overall membership. And New Hampshire NHPA has the largest membership among the 3 states. So just taking a look at what we have in 2020, our cash is really healthy, and that's a great thing, so that we have the capacity to do some creative and interesting and fun things. And I'll be talking a little bit about one of those things as we proceed. The handling of the membership, which has always been an enormous, laborious process and a real headache from year to year, has shifted to APA. So membership is being run through APA. Whether you are an APA member and chapter member and now also section member, which is kind of a default status. I mean, wherever you choose to list your address, that's your chapter. And by default, your section as well. Or you can choose to be a chapter-only member, not a member of APA, and pay a significantly reduced dues fee. That money comes back to us here in New Hampshire. So we're engaged right now in a membership campaign to augment the membership, to get people who have not been members before. Maybe they were, concerned about the cost of being an APA member. Well, you don't have to be an APA member. You can just be a chapter member and then by default also an NHPA member. We've also shifted to NHPA budgeting so that it's really difficult now to do long-term comparisons of our past budgets because we used to be running budgets of sometimes upwards of $50,000-$60,000 if we were hosting the chapter conference. All of that's now being run through the chapter's books. So our budgets year to year will look really fairly even going forward. Next slide, please. So looking forward to 21, just a few things before we just take a look at that spreadsheet, and I'll ask for the membership to vote on this. We are continuing, or we're planning to do a fee-based spring conference. So instead of the free webinars, which was great, we do want to see some revenue flowing back into our budget based on a spring conference, and we're working on the details of that. One change that we're making or proposing for your consideration is increasing legislative support to $4,000. And this is in essence our lobbyist. We had a lobbyist in the past, and this was Nancy Johnson, and ultimately we were paying her $4,000 for the work that she did for us. Then for a while, for I think a year, maybe two, we had Bill Clubbin, a retired planner from Bow, doing some legislative work for us. And then he decided he wanted to do other things. And last year we didn't have anyone doing any lobbying for us. And that was probably okay, given the, as Shanna pointed out, the weird circumstances of the legislative session in 2020. 2021 is going to be weird too. And you'll see, today is organization day in the legislature, and they're going to be meeting outside in Durham. Well, at least the sun is shining, but they better bundle up. We recognize that there's real value in having someone as our, eyes and ears in Concord and giving us advice on different pieces of legislation. And so Tim Corwin and I, and Tim will talk more about this in his report, have been talking with a lobbyist, and they've come up with a scope that fits within our $4,000 budget, which, in terms of lobbyists is frankly a pretty good bargain. You'll note also that we are planning to continue with ongoing professional development activities in the budget, whether we choose to charge for those and whether we bring in paid speakers, that remains to be seen, but we have in the budget the flexibility to do that. And here's the thing that is really new and different in the budget. The executive committee discussed this when we were working through the budget at our last meeting. We would really like to promote people to encourage people to take the AICP exam. And so we're proposing the creation of an exam scholarship to help people who, otherwise it's an expensive test to take. And we haven't worked out all the terms of this, but we're proposing the creation of an exam scholarship that would help some people who want to take the exam, but whose employers are not going to pay for it, and who themselves would struggle to pay for it too. So next slide, please. So this is the budget. It's a little bit difficult to read, but you should all have gotten that in your inboxes. And note in FY20, at least year to date, we're showing a balance in the black of $3,000. Thanks, Matt. And the proposed budget, some of these changes I've already talked about. Most of the revenue that we see is in the forms of the dues sharing from APA. But then we're also proposing the fee-based conference in the spring, a fee-based annual meeting with possibility of some sponsorships there as well. And total revenues of proposed $13,000 250. It's always a bit of a shot in the dark, projecting what these are going to be, but we wanted to present something that was relatively a balanced budget. Moving down to the expenses, most of these are fairly ordinary things. Note that we're proposing $4,000 for the spring conference. Sponsorship of other organizations is something that we have carried from year to year, and it allows us to provide some sponsorship, say, to Plan New Hampshire for some of its activities, and they in turn sponsor some of our things. So it often winds up being a wash. And you see that line, legislative support, increasing from $1,500, which we did not spend last year, to $4,000 this year. And then there's that AICP scholarship line of $1,000. For total expenditures proposed of $13,100, and proposed to be effectively a balanced budget, but in the black of $150. We'll see how it comes out at the end. We're usually in the black by a couple $1,000s. When we return to a more normal year, I think we will see our budgets returning also to something on the line of revenues and expenditures of upwards of $25,000. But we're not expecting 2021 to be normal, maybe a little more normal than 2020, but not really truly normal. So I'd happy to take any questions on this. And if there are none, I would entertain a motion to approve the budget. I don't see any questions in chat or spoken.
Tim Thompson, Merrimack, I'll move the approval of the budget.
Thank you,
Chris
Tim.
Parker, I'll second.
And Chris Parker seconds. Any discussion on this? Hearing none, please raise your hands to say aye. And I guess you'd also thumbs down for anyone who says no. All right, thank you, everyone.
Wonderful, thank you, Ben, appreciate that. Next thing on the agenda is the legislative liaison report, and Tim Corwin sends his regrets. He's unable to be here this morning. I think many of you remember Tim Corwin. He was on our executive committee several years ago when he worked in Dover, did a fabulous job as legislative liaison. First thing I want to say is a huge thanks to Scott Osgood, who has been our legislative liaison for many years. And I know Scott is here today. So Scott, thank you so much for all the work that you have done with the legislature, with reviewing legislation coming through. And as Ben had mentioned, we're very excited. We are working with trying to get a lobbyist this year. I think we've struggled in the past couple years not having a strong lobbyist. Nancy was fabulous, really in Concord for us and standing up for us pretty much constantly, which was such a loss when she passed away. And so the first thing that Tim wanted me to announce was that we are going to have a legislative subcommittee meeting on Wednesday, the 16th of December at 1 p.m. It is going to be virtual, so if anyone is interested, please reach out to either me or Ben or Tim Corwin. All of our email addresses are on the NHPA website. If you go to NHPA and then sections and go under New Hampshire, we're all there and you can find us. You can reach out to any member of the executive committee if you know someone better. But we would love to see as many folks as possible that want to help out with that. Tim did say too that he is going to be putting together a legislative survey this year. And so once all the bills are out, we typically put out a survey to the membership to find out, kind of help inform us, the executive committee and the legislative subcommittee, how to vote on some of these bills. I know Tim Corwin is already, and with Ben's help, tracking the LSRs that are coming in. Tim wanted me to read a few of them that are coming up. And if you're familiar with the legislature, when the LSRs come out, they are very vague. So I apologize, I really don't have any more information than what I'm going to read to you, but things that look like that are on our agenda, coming on the legislative subcommittee's agenda coming up, things like relative, let's see, acreage required to build certain single-family housing, legislation about remote board meetings under the right to know law, enforcement of zoning violations. Looks like accessory dwelling units is up again. Looks like membership of planning boards is going to be talked about again. Training and procedures for zoning and planning boards is something that's on, looks like is something that's up for debate. Consideration of developments of regional impact, restoration of involuntary merged lots, zoning board of appeals processes, review of planning board decisions, creation and use of electronic records by government agencies, authorizing municipalities to adopt more stringent septic system codes than are required by DES. The Housing Appeals Board is back up for discussion, it looks like. The siting of landfills near state parks, interesting one there. So these are a lot of the things that we've already identified that NHPA will take a look at. And what the legislative subcommittee does is by consensus vote, determine whether or not these pieces of legislation are something that we will support or not support. And once we, or just kind of watch. And once we determine whether or not we're going to support it or come out in opposition of it, then we say, all right, are we strongly opposed to that? Are we strongly in favor of that? And if we determine that we are, we do write a letter, and that letter goes to Concord, and we hopefully have someone accompany that letter to Concord, if I can put it that way, to testify at the public hearing. And so, you know, that's where we need those volunteers. We need your insight on whether or not we oppose or support, and we need some help drafting those letters and bringing those letters to Concord. So it's a very involved, you know, if it's something you want to be involved in Concord, then we've got a job for you. So please keep your eye open for that legislative survey. As soon as the LSRs kind of come in a little bit more, we'll be updating our website. Right now we have last year's kind of wrap up on our website, so you can keep track of it that way. And if there are not any questions about the legislative update, then I'm going to turn the floor over to the professional development officers, 2 of them, to give their report. All right, with no questions, Matt and Kyle, take it away.
Thanks, Shanna. I appreciate it. We'll provide a brief update, but I think this was fairly well covered by your introduction, Shanna. Obviously, we were forced into a pivot this year with some of our professional development activities. But before that happened, as part of the NHPA retreat that took place earlier this year, we did begin the year by defining 2 new roles for the professional development officers, one being really focused on ongoing smaller events, workshops, and the annual meeting, and the other being the focus on the spring conference and also providing backup assistance to those other events. So, of course, like anything, just when we spent time planning to have those 2 unique roles, COVID happened, and we were forced to pivot very quickly into a different consideration for how the spring conference would be held. For those that aren't aware, we obviously held the spring conference with 3 one-hour sessions focused on topics including sort of COVID lessons learned, recycling, and also the housing study work. And we were really fortunate to have great attendance for each of those sessions. And as a result, I would say that the pivot that we were forced to make was largely effective. Ultimately, we ended up with 89 registrations for the COVID session, 92 registrations for the recycling session, and 112 registrations for the housing session. So overall, a really great showing from the membership for each of those sessions. And I hope if you had a chance to attend that you found them helpful. If you didn't get a chance to attend, those presentations are still available on the NHPA NECAPA site, and they are available for review if you'd like to do that. Obviously, as we look forward, we do hope to offer more of those in a non-virtual format, hopefully moving into the 2021 year. And as we do that, we do plan to, again, move into those more defined roles for the 2 PDOs and offer more continuing education in the form of smaller workshops moving forward that may be more accessible and more digestible to the membership in addition to the annual conference and the annual meeting. With that, again, please do feel free to reach out to me about anything related to the spring conference. I do want to just take a second to thank all of the participants in that, some of which are on today. Also, we're small conference organizing groups. Antioch particularly, who was really critical in helping those events go off without a hitch, particularly on the technology side, as we all adjusted rapidly to the implementation of Zoom and virtual meeting technology. They were really helpful during that process. I'm going to turn it over to Kyle Pimentel, the other PDO, really on the conference side of things, to talk a little bit about what we'd like to hear from you for feedback moving into 2021 and how we're going to move forward.
Thanks, Matt. That was a really good sort of introduction to where we've been and now kind of shifting to where we're going and looking out to 2021. We recognize that there's still going to be a lot of uncertainty pertaining to in-person meetings. And we'd really like to get some feedback from the membership on how we've done with some of the events that we held this past year and how we can improve. Obviously you're free to submit any feedback that you like, within reason. But I think I'm just going to cover just a few things that we decided would probably be the most helpful for the executive committee to hear from the full membership. So the first is the format. As Matt mentioned, the spring conference was broken out over the course of 3 days. The idea being it would allow folks to kind of pick and choose which sessions they found most interesting and only have to commit to 1 hour of their day, as opposed to trying to keep everybody's attention for 3 to 4 hours with breaks in between. Obviously, the drawback to that is, folks would have to commit to 3 days, and that can be challenging at times. So, getting some feedback from the membership on as we move forward with some of these larger events, does it make more sense to spread them out, or does it make more sense to kind of combine them or combine it all into one day? So as you can see, and Matt touched upon this in terms of the number of registrations that we had, this approach seemed to work. And we'd like to, continue to offer these types of events, even in a COVID-free world. So, whether it's at the end of 2021 or 2022, I think that the virtual meetings are not necessarily going to go away. I think that we have found that there's a lot of value in having them, but we also recognize that it's not for every single event. So we'd like to hear from folks on, do they typically enjoy the virtual meeting setting? Are there ways that we can improve these to make them more engaging? So, while we feel that there's value there, I think that, we'd like to hear if there's ways that we can improve that. And then the last, piece of feedback that we'd really like to hear is access. And, because the past conferences have all been virtual, and Ben touched upon this, there was really no overhead for us. It was little to no cost to put those on. And so we made the decision at the EC level that all those events were going to, in 2020, we're going to be at no cost. However, we understand, moving forward, that next year it's going to be, it may be a little bit difficult with some budgets being frozen, and we want to be cognizant of those challenges, while also ensuring that we have some form of revenue that's coming in, so we can continue to offer things like AICP scholarships and other professional development training. So as Ben mentioned, we started discussions on implementing a fee-based spring conference. But in order for the EC to make these decisions, we'd really like some feedback from membership on whether you feel as though that future costs are going to be prohibitive in any of your continued participation. So we certainly don't want to create a scenario where these events are not well attended because of financial hardship. So please give us your thoughts on that. It would be greatly appreciated. And then the last thing to kind of just touch upon are the topics themselves. We covered the lessons learned in COVID, recycling, housing. Obviously today there'll be an equity and inclusion discussion, but were these topics, if you participated in these meetings, were they interesting? Were they useful? What else should we be considering? Are there emerging trends that for New Hampshire that we should be thinking about? As well as, did these topics translate well to a virtual setting? So one of the things that we have heard is that some of these topics or just, maybe not these in particular, but topics in general, you have to be really careful on what you choose, because some of them don't translate well to webinars. You really need to be in person. It needs to be more of an interactive session. So a little bit of feedback on the topics and where we can go for next year. The last thing I'll mention, and Matt touched upon this earlier, is we do want to continue to provide more professional growth opportunities this year with more smaller events. We didn't hold any last year. And those will be likely within a webinar format and really focused on a particular topic. So just as an example, today you're going to be hearing from our speaker on equity and inclusion, which is a really big and important topic. And our hope is that there will be enough interest for membership that we'll be able to dive into this topic in much greater detail in a future session that we could really kind of sink our teeth into. And so we're kind of looking for some guidance on, have there been topics that we've covered in kind of a general sense that we could really dive into in that kind of brown bag format setting, and provide more of those next year. So please, submit any feedback that you have to Matt or myself, and then we will bring this to the full EC and continue to think about how we can make more of these events as engaging as possible.
Great.
That's it.
All right. Thank you, Kyle and Matt. You guys are all set. Wonderful. So the next thing on the agenda is the social media report. And we added this to today really for a discussion of sorts, the best that you can have over virtual. And I'd love to have people add some thoughts into the chat box, or even just unmute and speak up. What the executive committee felt, and it looks like a lot of you agreed because this was voted in with the bylaw, is that the newsletter, the format that we were doing with the newsletter, which was kind of a large digital format, kind of grabbing news from around the state once a quarter or so, maybe twice a year, was a format that maybe wasn't working. And so we brainstormed having a position that could set up social media accounts on behalf of New Hampshire Planners Association and really put up news as it happens. We felt that when the newsletter went out, a lot of that news was kind of old news at that point. And so our thought process, and we kind of wanted to pass this by you guys, is that the platforms we're looking at are Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And so are these platforms you use, you find helpful, that if New Hampshire Planners Association set up an account, you would join and get information through? Are there other social media platforms out there that you would prefer, that you think getting information from would be better? Is the website really where you get your information? Or, were we mistaken, and should we have gone back to or continued with a digital newsletter? So I'm going to be quiet for a minute and let others jump in. Again, those platforms are Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Anyone? I see in the chat that Twitter and LinkedIn are good, and that we've got some potential TikTokers in the making. Anyone else wanted to mention anything?
Maybe as I never have a problem putting my foot in my mouth at these kinds of things. I think that in this day and age, Facebook is kind of for old people, and probably similar, Twitter and some of those things. And I say that with love as somebody who is gradually becoming an old people. And thinking about how we continue to connect with younger planners, whether it's continued professional development for people who are already in the state or trying to find that next generation of planners coming out of school. I think that different platforms can be used for different purposes. But I think if we're talking about social media as a way to promote NHPA, to promote the profession, to promote the organization, I don't know that social media is necessarily just for finding the information. It's also a visibility thing. So something like TikTok, even if we're saying it kind of facetiously, may be something that serves us all in the long run, even though I have absolutely no idea how it works.
Thank you, James. I appreciate that input.
Shanna, one thing I'd like to add to this, to go truly old school, listservs. We're still very largely communicating by email, at least professionally. And we have for a long time had an NHPA listserv, but it's inactive, and it's a Yahoo list which is being or has been discontinued. NHPA is investigating creating its own listserv through the University of Southern Maine, because the APA is no longer supporting its listservs. They exist, but they're not being supported. And the chapter at least sees the value in continuing to have a listserv. And I'm curious if folks are interested in doing that as well.
I do see in the chats here, LinkedIn and Twitter seem to be getting a lot of feedback, positive feedback. Thank you, Elizabeth, for the Facebook algorithm note. She said it makes it hard to find information if you're not tagging or being tagged right away. So that's good for us to know as well.
Shannon, one thing that I'll mention, and this is going well outside my expertise, but I know that some organizations use the tool WooBox to kind of connect all the different social media that you have. So whether that's Facebook, Twitter, whatever it is, and I think essentially how it works is if you make a post on Twitter and you put a hashtag, it will automatically send that same post to your Instagram, your Facebook. So you're not having to log in and write a post 4, 5, 6 different times. Same goes for sharing a news story or whatever it is. You can link all of your accounts together. So it kind of does a widespread blast, when you do something without having to do it individually. So I don't know how it works. I don't know what the cost is, but I do know that some organizations do use it and they have found it helpful. So it may be something worth investigating at some point.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you for that. All right, I think since I see everyone is very talkative and I understand how difficult it is to be, so no problems. We'll wrap this up. If you do have any thoughts though, please reach out to us. As we transition into this new social media platform that obviously none of us are masters at. In fact, somebody had mentioned they're not quite sure how to post up to TikTok, and I thought, oh, I'll just go and ask my 13-year-old son. He's probably a pro at it. So, as we make this transition, please reach out to us and say, hey, this isn't working, this is working, or, we're not reaching this audience, or, if you hear some of your younger coworkers really not participating, that's helpful information. Or for that matter, as we make this transition, if we're losing, some of the older demographic too, that perhaps is not on social media at all, that's not our intent as well. So please reach out to us on that.
Hey, Sarah, or Shauna, excuse me.
Yes.
Have Maine or Vermont had any experiences in advance of us? In other words, is there anything we can learn from, our neighbor states?
That's a perfect transition for me to introduce Sarah Marchant, who's going to talk about the NHPA report and can speak to that probably.
It's a good question. Both Maine and Vermont rely very heavily on their listservs. We have that OSI listserv that I'm sure some of you have loved and hated over the years. But Maine and Vermont rely very heavily on their listservs. We have a Facebook and an Instagram account and Twitter through NHPA. And I know that Jeff is trying to follow any social media accounts we have, and he would share those back and forth. We've had good luck with Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter to some extent as well. And it's a good way to share information, but those are the ones we're using, but both Vermont and Maine rely heavily on their listservs. So that's their biggest piece there. Which is one of the reasons why we at NHPA, and this goes nicely into membership in NHPA. As Ben mentioned, we have switched our management of membership over to APA. And in this first year of it, it has been more difficult than it should be. And the main reason is because both New Hampshire and Vermont, we have these organizational memberships that will be phased out at the end of this coming year. So at the end of January, the end of December 2021, we will no longer have organizational memberships. And APA has almost zero ability to handle AP organizational memberships. And so for all of us, there's many of us who are in organizational memberships, APA has struggled to be able to even just enter us into the database. And so we're kind of holding two different databases of membership. And so I apologize for that. I don't feel that they're going to fix it before the end of 2021. I think they're just going to be like, oh, well, just a year, it'll be fine. That's not the attitude we're taking. And we've had, I can't even tell you how many meetings with them trying to get this done, but it is not seeming to be possible. But once we eliminate organizational memberships, we'll fit into their box. And so everything should be fine. So as part of that, you should have recently gotten a renewal. Most of you, if you're not full APA members, if you're just a chapter member, you should have gotten an online a piece of paper from APA to renew your membership. You can renew with that piece of paper. If you log into APA, the numbers are not going to match. It's going to give you a different amount because they're trying to force you to join APA. You do not have to join APA. If you want to, great. If you do not want to, there's a link on the NHPA website to renew that would be just a chapter only membership, but they are trying to force you to join APA. So you should know that. And again, it won't be possible next year for them to do this because we'll get rid of the organizational memberships, but we're in this weird middle zone. The other good news though, is if you know any students can join entirely for free right now through APA. So they can get a free APA membership and they'll get a free membership to the chapter. If you go onto APA, I do think they'll be ending that policy next year. So please that's a great resource for students to be able to join for free and to have access to full APA and NHPA and NHPA's information. So I think that's a really good resource we're trying to spread the word on. But if you have questions about your membership and when you get your mailing, or if anything seems weird, please just reach out. I'm more than happy to help. The other big news at APA is the changes to the CM credits if you're an AICP, which is awesome that NHPA is going to encourage more AICP. They're changing the credits starting in January, that you'll still be required to have 1 hour of law, one of a targeted topic, and they are going to be providing that kind of targeted topic education. The first one is climate. And so there will be lots of free webinars and things through APA online, but also they'll be giving chapters stuff so that we can provide this education. And then ethics, you need 1 credit of ethics and 1 credit on equity related to ethics. And so this session today that NHPA is providing would fill some of those gaps. And NECAPA will do everything it can to make sure that you have access to the 4 credits at least every single year, because that is really important to the membership. We heard that loud and clear at the NECAPA meeting, and so we'll be making sure those happen. So instead of these 1.5 hour credits, which you used to need, now everything's just 1 hour. It equals the same number of credits, but how they're being divvied up is a little bit different. So I'm happy to answer questions on that, if there are any. Let's see.
All right, thank you very much, Sarah. All right, the next thing is the officer election results. And we are so pleased to have folks interested in being on the executive committee. So thank you, thank you. Elected to our executive committee this year, new is Kayla Tavers from North Country Council. We are absolutely thrilled to have some North Country representation. So thank you so much, Kayla. And Tara Kessler from the city of Keene. And again, to have someone from the western side of the state, absolutely fabulous. So thanks for those 2 new members. Tim Corwin was appointed by the executive committee to fill the legislative liaison seat several months ago when Scott stepped down. You guys have now ratified that. So thank you to Tim Corwin. And Tim, you are looking mighty fine today, I must say, for that. And Matt Sullivan, who I just need to thank once again for putting together this fabulous production. You guys have voted him back in. Very smart move. Matt is fabulous. So Matt, both Matt and Kyle helped out today. So thank you for that. Again, we will be having 1 more position open. So if anyone in the membership is interested in serving on the executive committee, please be in touch with us. We'd love to have you. And then moving on to the bylaw amendment results. So the bylaw did pass, and I don't have formal numbers. Donna, I don't know if you have those in front of you.
I do. We had a couple with just 1 against, so pretty much everyone was on the same page.
So fairly unanimous, fabulous. Yes. And I just typically, and I think back to when we shifted to a section of NECAPA, we spent meeting after meeting kind of going over that stuff with you, which we really didn't have the opportunity to today. I really appreciate you trusting in us and voting this through. I did want to mention that several of the changes did have to do with kind of our shift to a NECAPA section. So for example, the terms of the timing of the executive committee now line up with the NECAPA terms and turnover as well. And the strategic session that we held in January, we wanted to basically codify that because we have an administrative support person from NECAPA who is not full-time. She works for several other nonprofits, and so she really needs to schedule her year starting in January. And so that strategic planning session now is going to be very important in January so that we can schedule the entire year and make sure that she has the dates for the annual meeting, the conference, things like that, that we may need her administrative support on early on. So the other thing, the corporate seal, really just housekeeping. You guys are very familiar with our logo that you see up in the corner of the slides today. Anyone that's been with us for a while knows that we tried to revamp that logo several years ago, and we loved it so much that all we did was add little waves to the river, and everyone said, yes, we love it, let's keep it. But we did have some antiquated language in that bylaw that needed to change. So. And then the rest really is the terms of office. I mean, the new executive committee positions, which I've spoken to today. And I'm begging once again, we do need 1 more person. So if you're interested in social media, in helping us out with the website, in helping us out with membership, we would love to have you as an executive committee member to work on that function. So with that, I wanted to open it once again for any questions. If there are any questions about those bylaw changes, any questions about kind of the new structure of the executive committee, any questions about what those new positions will be doing. And I've closed my chat, so let me open that again. All right, if there are no questions, then I think I'm going to be looking for a motion to adjourn the business meeting, and we'll move on to our speaker.
It moves to adjourn.
Donovan, thank you. Is there a second?
Second, Tim Thompson, Merrimack.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tim. All those in favor of adjourning, please raise your hand. And Matt, take it away if you'll introduce our fabulous speaker.
Great. Thanks, Shannon. I appreciate it. And I'm so thrilled today to introduce a very exciting speaker to the group that I've been working with actually over the past few months to put together this keynote topic today focused on equity, inclusion, diversity. But I want to take a minute to introduce our speaker because she is a multi-talented, multi-expertise individual that I think you're really going to be impressed with. And I want to emphasize what Kyle had mentioned before, and that is that we really view this keynote today as the beginning of a dialogue that will be much longer and much more involved about the role that equity plays in each of our communities across the state of New Hampshire. So please, although we will have a Q&A as part of this today, if you have questions, please feel free to send them to me after. I'll make sure that those do get to Sara directly. And we expect to have more sessions with Sara moving forward as in some format, whether it be part of a small workshop or part of some of our conference events moving forward. But before we get into this exciting topic, I just want to take a minute to introduce her. For the keynote titled Planner to Co-Planner, using a race, equity, diversity, and inclusion framework to increase community access and engagement. And joining us today is Sara Orozco. And Sara is truly, as I said, the epitome of a multidisciplinary expertise individual. She's bilingual, bicultural, and she's an independent consultant, executive coach, and licensed psychologist with 25 years of experience working in the nonprofit sector. So surely a wealth of knowledge and background for us. Throughout her career, she's been deeply committed to racial justice and social equity issues, working in partnership with clients to identify goals, outcomes, and strategies that advance and support equity, diversity, and inclusion within organizations and within communities. Raised in a Spanish-speaking household in Miami by Cuban-born parents, she's experienced really firsthand, I think, the joys and challenges of getting ahead as an individual in a world that sometimes favors labels, and I think we can all understand that. In many ways, she describes herself as the embodiment of the American dream, and I think we'll hear a little bit more about that today. She earned her Ph.D. in psychology from Georgia State University in 1993, and then completed her postdoctoral training at the Scripps Research Institute, followed up by accepting an academic appointment at Harvard Medical School. She is also a writer and storyteller who's published essays in the Delmarva Review, Oxford Magazine, and Bay Windows, and she is a Muff Story Slam winner. I must admit after that I'm feeling a bit boring myself. She's really an accomplished individual, and I hope you'll enjoy her talk today. Again, I hope that this is the beginning of a long-term dialogue that we have about equity and diversity in the New Hampshire planning community. And I hope that as you listen today to what may at times be a new and uncomfortable topic, talking about things like race, socioeconomic, diversity, equity, I hope that you begin to think about the way that thinking about these things in a different lens in your community and implementing them as part of the planning process might change the way that we work within our communities and might make a big, big impact by making small changes. Again, after Sara's presentation, we'll have a short 15-minute Q&A. Please don't hesitate to put your questions in the chat box below. And certainly if you do want to verbally ask a question, we have a small enough group that at the end, I think we have the ability to do that, but please do hold off until the end of Sara's talk. With that, I'm going to hand over the virtual floor to Sara. I'm going to allow her to share her screen. And Sara, if you wouldn't mind kicking us off, we're really excited.
Great. Yeah, perfect. Hello, everybody. I know there's people who I don't see. So thank you, Matt, for the introduction. So what Matt said about this presentation is actually right. This topic of ready is so big that there's no way we would be able to cover in an hour, all parts of every topic and everything that falls under ready. I'm hoping during this presentation that I can give you an introduction to some of the terminology and some of the ways in which we can today, starting tomorrow, we could apply some of these techniques to at least start the work. I am fully aware that many of you may already know everything that I'm about to present. So I thank you for your patience. I hope that you're open to potentially hearing something new that you haven't heard before. And if this is your first time hearing these terms, I'm just going to say, please be patient with yourself. These words are not easy. They're kind of cognitive. They're kind of in books as a way to describe things that we do in research, but the concepts are really simple I hope after we explain it today. So anyway, I'm going to get started. Hopefully my PowerPoint works. And Matt, if people have questions, they can send them to you, right? Okay. Oops. All right, can everybody see that?
Yes.
Is it showing up on the full screen?
It's the partial screen, Sarah. I think that's okay. I can still
Okay,
read it.
there we go.
Great.
Okay. So, here we go. I'm trying to get to the thing. Okay. So one of the things I like to start with, and in some of this, I'm also hoping to model what I hope you can do when you go back to your communities and try to engage people in a conversation, or at least get them started. So we always like to start these conversations about ready with some community agreements. I just want to emphasize that when we put these community agreements together, that we ask everybody in the room what would make them feel more engaged in these conversations. It used to be a long time ago that we put community agreements in because we wanted to establish some type of safety. But we know that we can't have safety in these rooms because in a way, it's a way of saying, well, let's not make people uncomfortable. So that sort of cuts out a lot of the conversation. So the main things I want you to think about today, and every time you engage in one of these conversations, is just be willing, almost expect to be a little bit uncomfortable. And this will may be hard, but expect and accept that there won't be closure. You know, this isn't the kind of work and talks that we have that at the end, we just wrap it up and say, okay, we're done. So every time we do one of these, it just opens up even more questions. So just be aware of the time you take up. I know we're really leaving all the questions to the end. Be curious, use I statements as much as possible. Stay engaged. This work is hard. And we all have ways in which we exit. We might look at our phone, we might look at a computer screen, we might just daydream, right? Sometimes we need a break. Our brains need to sort of leave the topic to regroup. Just be aware to come back and stay engaged as much as possible, even if it's a little uncomfortable. And I'm going to talk about accountability in a second, and always speak your truth. Okay. This is something that I have certainly learned with my hat as a psychologist, and that is that we all have different zones in which we approach difficult conversations. And so in order for us to learn material, we have to sort of be in what we call the learning zone. The comfort zone is the first step, and that's when we're not feeling any discomfort. In fact, we might even feel a little disengaged and even sleepy, bored. And so in that stage, we don't really learn a lot. Then there's the opposite, the one that panics, that makes us panic, fight or flight. I'm getting out of here. This has got to stop. And that's panic. We don't do a lot of learning either. You see, learning has to happen in the middle. There's got to be enough of comfort, and a little bit of panic. There has to be a little bit of adrenaline, a little bit of anxiety, but not too much and not too little. So I hope today we can find ourselves in the learning zone, and that you use a way for you to come down from the panic zone if you get there, or if you're too bored and engaged, try to figure out how to be more curious about what we're talking about. All right. This is just so important. I'm gonna just spend a moment here, and that is, and I truly believe this, is that everybody has good intentions. You know, I think when people engage in these conversations, they're trying to do something different. But just as any other time in our lives, even in best of intentions, we make mistakes. We say things that are wrong. We say things that hurt other people. We don't mean it, but it happens. So it happens in these types of conversations a lot because sometimes we might not be familiar with a word we're talking about, or we may not know what a microaggression is. So we say things, and that other person in the room is impacted. Typically what happens when somebody puts a comment out there that hurts another person, they will say, well, I didn't mean to. Or, oh my God, you're so sensitive. How could that affect you? You see, and what happens there is the comment, the one who made the comment, now it goes back to that person. Now we have to take care of the person who's like, I didn't mean that. And we have to sort of work with that person to say, well, of course you didn't mean it. You're a good person, whatever. And what we did is we just left the person who actually got hurt alone. So what we need to do is when the person has something to say that hurts somebody else, is to make sure we don't go back to that person and that we stay with the person that was hurt and that we listen, we reflect, we apologize, and we do better. It's hard to ask questions, but come back to this if this doesn't make sense to you. So I'm going to go through the word ready. As I'm going to put, I put a period between the letters because they truly are very different. And so I just like to put Aretha Franklin, because every time I see ready, I think of respect, you know, R-E, I can't sing, but it's the Aretha Franklin song of respect. But anyway, so what is diversity, right? We talk about it all the time. I think most of us know what diversity is, right? It includes all the ways in which we are different. It's an expansive list. It recognizes everyone in every group as a part of that. You know, sometimes I hear in talks or workshops that that there is no diversity in a community, or that, you know, we don't have people of color, we don't, you know, and when we're looking at diversity, yes, a person's ethnicity, race, all that matters. But sometimes even within the white culture, and some people don't even see white as culture, is that within there certainly exists a diversity, especially that, you know, intersects socioeconomic status. And so when we talk about diversity, we could be talking about white people, and the diversity there could be their socioeconomic status. We also talking about ways in which we are able or not able to do things, right? So there's so many ways to look at diversity. What we don't want, and I know many people, and I hear this because I work with different organizations, is they want to get more people of color to join their organizations, to move into their town, to be part of the board, or all those things. What we have to be careful with is that we don't invite the person without having worked on inclusion, right? Because otherwise, that person you invited is just a check, right? Okay, we got our 2 people of color and we got this, but it's much more complicated. So diversity and inclusion go together. And so I just wanted to, I'm going to leave you all with this PowerPoint. So please don't have to worry about taking notes, but I listed as many as possible of all the ways we are different. We are different in the ways we make up our family. We're different in sexual orientation and gender identity and expression. We're different in physical distinctions, national origin, skills, religion, perspective. So make sure when you're thinking about how to diversify whatever it is that you're trying to do, your organization, your planning committees, whatever it might be, that you think diversity outside the box, right? What I want to make sure though, and we're going to get to it, is that a lot of people put DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I ask that you please leave the R in race, because what happens is when people think about DEI, it's much easier to just talk about these issues and about equity and about, you know, inclusion, and easy to leave race out, because race is difficult to talk about. It makes people uncomfortable. So I say leave the R in, make it race, equity, diversity, and inclusion. But you're going to see a lot of places that just say the DEI. So just beware that we just can't leave the R out. So I just want to put a couple terminologies in there, but you might hear the word intersectionality, right? How many of you have heard? I can't see you anyway. So how many of you have heard the word intersectionality? Thank you. Oh, great. Awesome. Thank you. And so intersectionality is that we're not just one aspect of our identity. In fact, most of us, when we're fully human, we have multiple identities, right? And so we may be a woman, we may be a Black woman, we could be a disabled. So we are all these different parts. And sometimes we just talk about one person's identity, but I hope that you can respect and think about not only just how people differ, but the addition of all of these potential levels of oppression might make it even more difficult for individuals. And so here's an example, right? So this is a man, but he's also a Black man, but he's also a Black gay man, right? So the way he interacts with the world as a man, the way he interacts in the world as a Black man, and a Black gay man. So he could go into an office setting and he's a Black man and people see that, but he doesn't have to come out with the being gay. He can hang that one outside the door, right? So we as individuals decide sometimes what identities we will bring into the space. So just beware, when you have a group of people may only be revealing certain aspects of their full human being. All right, moving on. So what is inclusion? Inclusion, it's better to explain it by some of the things that it's not. So exclusion, we know, we just don't let people in. Separation, we're familiar with, when we put one group on this side of the street and a street that has a different name, we put another group of people, right? So we've got them separated, but they're all in the community. What we have when we integrate is that, okay, everybody's in the same neighborhood, but still all the people of color live in a circle, while the people that are not people of color, the majority maybe, are living outside. But inclusion is, so I just to explain all those different ones, is when it's all together. Everybody has a decision, the ability to make decisions. There is no separation, there is no exclusion, and there is no pockets of people, right? So it is a full integration, just to be aware of what is inclusion. Okay. Now the fun part. I know, how many of you know the word equity, equality? Okay, yeah, perfect, good, great. So equity, we use equality, we use equity, and we use these words, often. In fact, they're hot words, especially equity. We use it a lot, right? So, but what is it? Equity is a place in which it's a system in which all groups of people in society have equal access to all of its resources and opportunities, and they're not going to be burdened because of their lives, the skin of their color or where they came from. Everybody has an ability to have access to all the community has to offer, right? The important part about equity is that not only do people have access to all these resources, is that they're also have a voice or are part of the decision making. They're part of the planning. They have the power to make decisions about what will and what won't fit into that community, right? So that's equity. Everybody has a voice. Everybody's there. Everybody has equal access, right? I'm going to say any questions, but if you have questions, please pop them into the chat. All right. How many people have, oh gosh, I keep going to this. I'm gonna just protect it. How many people have seen this picture? Right, lots of us have seen this picture. And they use it all the time to say what, to define equality and to define equity, right? So equality, that's what it is, right? It's, we give everybody the same thing, regardless of their needs. It's bicycles. You're just going to give that community all bicycles, right? Equity is, in this picture, is giving everybody what it is that they need. But when this picture was done, it probably was not intentional. But if you see that the people are different sizes, right? And for what people see about this picture is, yes, but it still says that the ones who are immature or not fully developed, or are handicapped or whatever it may be, still are less than, right? So we don't have, it's not like we have equal sized people here. We just have, and of course, the ones who need the most help are the ones who society may deem as invaluable or less than, diminished. But all right, so we try not to use this picture, but most people don't even see the differences in sizes. What's really cute about the equality one is that the boy, or the man with the purple shirt, is actually looking through the fence. And that identifies sort of a sense of resiliency, that even though there's a wall there, he has found a way to be able to still see what it is that he needs to see. And I don't understand at all why they use the baseball thing, so I'm not even gonna try to analyze that one, right? So here's the idea that this just sort of perpetuates that the myth that some people are just have less because of the physical characteristics, that it is something about them that keeps them from getting out of poverty, not being able to get a job, find a home, that it's something about their physical characteristics. It's personal, right? So now let's look at this picture, right? So this one, it's equality, right? We still give everybody, the first picture of this one is, we still give everybody the same amount, the same stool, right? But what we have to take into account is that not everybody we're not all on the same starting line. Some people start out with less. So if we give everybody the same and we don't take into account that we all didn't start in the same place, even when we give everybody the same, it doesn't solve the issue. Because we have to account not only for what's missing, but where they start and the oppression and systematic racism that has existed in this country for hundreds of years, right? And so we have to take that account, that it's even more that we need, not because of the individual, but because of the system of oppression that we're facing. So I just thought these pictures are a good way to explain, equality, giving everybody the same thing. And sometimes that works, and sometimes it doesn't work, because we're not taking into account that people need different things and that people are starting in different places. We can't assume everybody started in the same place. All right, this is another picture of that in case you want to use this one, and it's a different way to point it, but it also looks at inequality. So let's get to the term racism. All right, so we've gotten through the D, E, I. So we're into racism, the R, right? What is racism? It's the beliefs, attitudes, and actions that individuals take against other individuals of a different group. Racism is also a system. So an example of racism, right, is a board member rejects all Mexican-American new member nominations. It could be that they are aware of this or unaware of this, right? And so, example, someone writes a negative Instagram post about a particular ethnic group. That's racism. That's racist. Right? Sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's unintentional. It's an act of omission. All right. So I said that racism is also a system. And I do not have time in this talk to be able to go back into the history of where this institutionalized racism, systematic racism originated, right? We know we could go back into 1640, I think is when people came up with the white culture and identified who is white, who is black, who is, so we know that there was a time period, and it was the people with power who created then these systems, and it has stayed in place forever. It's still in place today. That's why the work that you're doing is so important, because what we have to do in order to really get our work done is that we need to understand that every system that is in place is set up to benefit some people while keeping other people down. It does two things: benefits a group and at the same time puts another group down, right? So I'm sure all of you are familiar with redlining. Right, and here's a picture of an actual redlining event in which some people, were able to move into neighborhoods and get mortgages and loans, and because of the way their community, their area was coded as a safe place, where some other people were not able to get, mostly Blacks, were not able to get housing because they couldn't get mortgages based on their being Black, because that area was deemed hazardous. So if you're interested in more redlining, please check this out. So implicit bias. I hope, I always like asking, does anybody have an example of implicit bias? Does anybody know what implicit bias is? I would love if somebody wants to get on the speaker, take yourself off the speaker. I'd just love to hear from you. What is implicit bias? You don't have to be on correct, but.
James, you want to take a shot?
Sure. It's the sort of subconscious, racial or other immediate reactions to people who are different from you. So it may not be a conscious decision to react to somebody of another race, but it's sort of the things that you do anyway, or the reactions that you have anyway.
Absolutely. Does anybody else want to add to that?
Would it be implicit bias for me to say that everyone at this meeting is amazing because we're all planners?
that would, I think in that case, what do they call it? The halo effect. I think that's what it's called. And that is that your belief that everybody in this group is fantastic, which is true. They're amazing. And so there's a halo effect. And in psychology, when we talk about the halo effect, that means that you might not be able to see things when they do something wrong, because you will struggle with cognitive dissonance. I think all the people I work with are amazing. And then you see them do something not great, right? Then you struggle. Well, how can I think this person's good, but how could they do that? So we have to have less anxiety, right? So we work around that. And sometimes what people do is they don't see the bad thing, but because they're halo effect, because they believe that person is a good thing. So anyway, take that. So yes, halo effect for sure. So I think implicit bias. Anybody else?
This is Colin from Stratford Regional Planning. Just a thought on kind of a plannery example, thinking of when people talk about the quote unquote bad part of town. At least growing up in Portland, Oregon, that was the north side, where the bad part of town was where people of color were kind of in your diagram. They were put in that, they were put in that in the circle in their own neighborhood. And And so assuming that the bad part of town is where people of color live is kind of ingrained in that. And I had a question thinking about implicit bias. Is that it strikes me as being related to confirmation bias, which, you know, we see on Facebook and and like media in general, to use capital M media, that you know, Facebook uses algorithms that only shows you stuff that you agree with to keep you coming back. And it just made me think that those two are connected.
Actually, I think that's great. And I could see that being true. It's just and I'm trying to think exactly what the meaning of confirmation bias, but only seeing things that support your vision of
Yeah,
things.
only like seeing things that only support your views and sort of fleeing from ideas that are contrary to your views.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes. It is in a way, because with implicit bias, because it's unconscious. You know, let's say you were growing up in a, you know, in a neighborhood that was affluent, but, you know, not too far away, there's a community that's, you know, people call it a high crime community. It's mostly Black and brown people. And when you were a child, your parents would drive through that neighborhood and they would say, you know, they would say, lock the door, right? Lock the door. We're going to be going. And so you are a child in the back of that car. And what you see is you lock the door because there are Black and brown people out there. So early in age, you are learning that what is out there is dangerous, right? So as we take that in and we don't challenge that at those early ages, it becomes part of our unconscious. We are not even aware that event so early in childhood might influence how we feel now when we walk into a community that they deem high crime, but is full of people of color, right? So we have that unconscious bias, and we still may lock the door. So we operate out of things that we learned early in life. We all have implicit bias. Everybody has. If you grew up in America, if you went to school here, if you live in this, you know, world, you have implicit bias. The thing is to be aware of it, bring it to consciousness. So we try not to do it. And if you do it, intention versus impact, I am so sorry. You know, I'm sorry it hurt you, and I'm going to take it, you know, I'll try to do better. I'll definitely do better next time. Right. So I wanted to introduce you, if you haven't done it, Harvard does a lot of testing on implicit bias, and they have this website here, and you can go in there and they have implicit bias test on gender, age, ageism. They have it on so many different topics, or sexual orientation, and they have it on skin color. So, and what they do is they put pictures like the ones you're seeing here, and people have to identify who are the Black people and who are the white people. And then they have to associate. Then fast, a picture will come up and you have to quickly say it's good or bad. So, and you do enough of these. And what happens sometimes is that you see a Black person and you might automatically go to bad because it happened so quickly. It was your implicit bias that was taking you there. This is a great test. There's so many of them. They're free. So if you have time and when you have time, take one of these and sort of make sense, or some of you take it together and talk about it. Okay. Okay. So how many people have heard of the word white fragility? It's the name of a book. Yeah, good. Can you tell me a little bit about what you think white fragility is? Am I getting a text?
It's this is Colin again from SRPC. This book was really helpful for me. I mean, it's just one example. uncomfortability you were talking about at the beginning, and the uncomfortability in talking about race, because at least my bias growing up with is that whiteness is normal, and I can't be racist because I was taught to treat everyone the same. And so why are you talking with me about race when I'm not a racist bad person?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So well said. Right. And what happens when it's a well-intentioned white person who is in a meeting and something happens when we're talking about whiteness, and it hits them. And this happens to like white progressive individuals. They're such well-intentioned, but they're going to say things. And the moment they say something, they feel, or a person of color says something about white people, the white person goes into a reaction, goes into a, well, I'm not a racist and I'm not that, and all these different things. And what happens is that whatever the conversation was about what the Black person was saying is no longer possible, because we have upset the white person so much in this conversation. And so now it has stopped the conversation. So I highly recommend this book, just so that you understand the word white fragility, but because it's also really helpful to understand what's happening to you in meetings, if in case you're getting comfortable. I also recommend this to people of color as well. All right. Are we out there still? All right, I'm gonna go on. Okay, perfect. So, okay, let's move on. So I'm gonna get to the why and then the what, right? The problem is we have got to figure out how to break apart the systems and reconstruct them in a way that works for everybody. Because if we don't do this and we don't do it right away, we continue to perpetuate what these systems were set up to do. And the systems are working the way they're supposed to, right? We will continue to have greater racial, ethnic disparities in our communities, and it will continue to grow, and we will make people more, it will continue to make people, low-income individuals, people in poverty, continue to depend, greater dependency on that we create dependency in them, because they continue to need more and more instead of lifting them up so they're not dependent on us or whatever the resource is, right? All right, so what is our work? Right, you're gonna go to a field near your house, a baseball field. And I want you to just tear down that wall. Now I tear down that wall. That's what, right. So you tear the wall, because why is the wall there to begin with? Right? Because then if the wall wasn't there, we can actually start. It's what we do when we do social justice. When we do something that's justice, is we are trying to eliminate the systemic racism and oppression that exists. So it's important to do this work because it makes a difference. We all have to take away the walls that are keeping people down. And it doesn't matter where you do it, in your organization, in your community, in your national organization, whatever it is. We have to start getting rid of this. That's why we do this work, right? So I'm just looking at the time. So I get these questions all the time. When I go to a workshop or I do something like this, people will say, that's great, but what can I do? How do we solve it? Right? And I don't know, different groups are different people. Some people just really want to go into the solution, right? Let's just not spend so much time on the problem and just solve this, move forward, right? So how many people love this slide? What can I do? How do we solve it? imagine, I don't know how it is in the planning world, but I imagine, yes, that somebody jump up. Of course we love it because we want to do something. I think we're all well-intentioned people. We want to do something. Sometimes we don't know what to do. And sometimes I say to individuals, and don't take this in a bad way, I'm going to say it in a good way, is when people ask me, well, I don't know what racism is, or I don't know what racism is. And then I say, well, what do you do when you don't know what a certain type of tree is? What do you do when you don't know anything about astrology? Right? You Google it. You ask people. You take a class in it. But for some reason, when it comes to racism, people just want the answers. They want to be told what to do. And what is being asked, especially of all of us, is to stop asking and do the work ourselves. Stop asking people to explain it. Stop asking people of color in your communities, on your boards, on your meetings, to explain what went wrong, right? So it's important. Okay, I like that question, but I think we also need to ask ourselves first, how did we get to this point in the first place, right? Do we understand the root causes of our current situation? I truly believe in solution-focused work, right? I love moving people forward and giving them relief for whatever is so stressful in their lives right now. Yet, and some people like that, but when it comes to this work around ready, we actually do have to be aware of why and how did we get here? Why and how is it happening in your individual communities? So I'm going to put on my other hat, and I'm going to put my psychologist hat on. So as a psychologist, and you can see before COVID where the couples sat there. So I work with couples, right? And so let's talk about love for a second. So when a couple comes into my office and I meet them for the first time, they're usually at their worst. They're usually at a place where both individuals might actually be hurting each other by, withdrawing love, or they're fighting, and they come into the office and they really want relief. What can we do? We're not going to make it. I feel like we're at the end. Okay, I think we're going to get a divorce, whatever it might be, right? And so as a therapist, I do think of something that they can leave that day with that will help them start the work. But when they start coming in, I might give them a communication skill, whatever it might be. I may ask them to please commit to this process, no matter how hard it gets. But what happens is when they come back for their next session is I start asking them about who they are, where they came from, what were their parents like, or their grandparents, whoever raised them, or, other person. And I need to hear it from both of them. I also need to hear what is their goals, right? Because I cannot give them a solution without understanding what their problem is, right? It has to fit. I may say, well, why don't you go out on more dates once a month or whatever? Okay, it might work, but it's not sustainable. Because at the core, there may be some childhood abandonment issues. There's so many things that could be behind the scenes. I need to know that. And I need to know what they want to work on. And so they're telling me what the problem is. They're telling me what they're willing to do to suffer. So I just want to bring this when we talk about what do we do? Yes, we could put a quick fix we could do a fix in our community. We could translate a paper into 2 languages, right? But if we don't really understand what's going on, but if we don't understand or are not talking to the people who are affected and with our decision, involving them in the creating of the solution, it's hardly going to work, right? So anyway, just keep that in mind. This talk, and Matt, you were saying that, you know, there's going to be a lot more of these. And I do think at some point it will be important to bring someone in to talk about, let's talk about the history. And that's a painful talk, because we have to go to the painful history of what's happened in this country to different groups, right? So that would be a great one to have where there's more time. Any comments?
This is,
Right.
I have
Yeah,
one
yeah.
question, Sarah. Thinking about kind of the what do we do, where do we go from here question, do you have any resources on like problem identification when it comes to race, equity, inclusion, you know, that sort of realm? You know, I'm trying to think of this through a planning lens, and like going through a problem identification exercise around these issues. Like, you know, maybe we start with like income disparity in New Hampshire, which is paired or correlates with race in general. You know, so yeah, that's my question. A sort of problem identification that could be useful in a planning world.
Yeah. So, you know, when I first think of this, I think of a slide I'm going to show you later about the kinds of questions we have to ask ourselves every step of the way. Every time we're going to engage in something, problem identification, you know, creating a map, whatever it may be, we need to ask ourselves a set of questions. Who's not at the table? Who is at the table? You know, who's telling us the story? You know, there's so much to consider in problem identification, because if there's only one person trying to identify the problem in a community, we've missed the boat, right? We need to actually go into the community and have people tell us the story of what the problem is, include them, right? Because our problem analysis has our lens, has our history, the way we do research, the schools we went to, the way we were taught history. I don't know if that makes sense. But so at the end of this, I'm going to put a like what I call a ready framework about ways we can get at. It doesn't matter if it's problem identification. It doesn't matter if it's, you know, working with another organizations. How do we make sure we continue to do, you know, ready work? So if you can hold on to that one, and I still don't answer it at the end of this, please bring it up. Is that okay?
Awesome, thank you.
All right, one quick thing. When we work with Ready, so it is not a technical fix. It's a technical challenge. You cut your finger, we know what to do, right? What do? You call your mom, or you put a Band-Aid, right? It's a quick fix, right? That's all we do. Problem, solution. We know it. We know the answer. This is not a technical challenge that we're talking about when we talk about Ready. What we're talking about is adaptive challenges. And sometimes where we hit a wall is when we try to provide a technical solution into an adaptive challenge, putting a Band-Aid on something that's so big and so large and complicated. An adaptive challenge is one that we don't know the answer to. It's one that requires a culture shift. It requires a significant different way of doing business. It's not business as usual. So if we put one Band-Aid on this one issue, it's not going to work. We're putting a technical fix on an adaptive challenge. An adaptive challenge is really difficult. Does that make sense? Anybody else have anything to say about this one? So you might be aware when you're trying to work with the community to change maybe the way people, maybe trying to get a park put into a place, or, some more green space. And it might be that, when the planning process comes, we start to hit some difficulties about what people feel about that land and land use. I don't know, you take this, and we can't just say, okay, we're gonna put a trail here. So anyway, I just want you to know, be aware when you're trying to do something, whether you're trying to do a technical fix to an adaptive challenge. Ready is an adaptive challenge. We don't know the answer. That's what makes this work so hard, right? I like to have an answer when I have a question, but this is not that place. That's why it never ends. That's why we're always learners. We all are. All right. So last thing I'll say about this before I get into the, well, what do we do? So it's not enough also to just educate people about race. We're past that point, right? We must also be anti-racist. So yes, we need to be educated, but we also need to be active in tearing down that fence, right? And you see it, you see people in particular who are marching, especially over the summer, where people are so upset and they're so angry that they want policy changes, right? And so they're not only just, educated, know what's going on, they're on the streets marching, demanding that for instance, that we think of, police differently, right? So it's getting educated is one part, we need it. But to fully go out there and do something, writing postcards to a candidate who's running somewhere else, whatever it may be, it's one step further. So we ask that you please not only be, open to all of this, but take a step, call each other on things. Okay. Okay, before I move into the final part, which is like, okay, lady, teach us something. Anything to say about this first part? There's all this can be unpacked. There's so much here. I just hope, I think of these things sometimes as I am taking you to the library and I'm going to show you a book on the shelf. I'm going to take it down. You're going to read the title and I'm going to put it back. And then I'm going to go on, and all of these are titles in a library. Each one of these has books on it. So it's a good introduction, because we're going to be, I hope, as Matt said, more of this is coming your way. All right. So okay, I need my glasses. Okay. So we need to create a race, equity, diversion, a ready lens, a ready framework. And I know some people in here are familiar with this, and so we used to call it a lens, but I really ask that you please call it a race, equity, diversion, and inclusion framework, because what happened with lens is the idea that someone can take it off and put it back on. And for a lot of people, there's not a lot of things they can take off. And so we want it to be a framework as opposed to something that's temporary, that it always becomes part of our work. The reason we come up with a ready framework is to be able to apply it into every aspect of our work. This is a simple tool in a way, because you develop it, you could apply it every day, starting today. It's an explicit line of questioning that individuals can ask themselves every step of the way, regardless what part of the job you're involved with. You can ask yourself a set of questions, right? It also highlights the challenges in your community when you start to ask these kind of questions. And I also want to make sure that, I know sometimes people develop surveys and many things to get a feel for the community. Just make sure that the community is also helping create the questions. So those are how we can involve our community, because right then and there, the questions we're asking are going to lead to the answers. and we don't know if that's right. So ensure it'll highlight the problems, but the beautiful thing about a framework is that it's going to give us new ideas. If we've been doing things the same way for so long, here's an opportunity to do things differently. And it's exciting. You know, maybe not exciting because we don't know the answers and we like to have answers, but it's exciting. We're going to see our community in new ways. We're going to engage with them more. All right. So how do we create it? How do we create our, oops, what's the extra G doing in there? So how to create your own ready framework. All right. I'm going to give you examples of questions that I had put together for board, or with this program that we were working for with boards, and it can be adapted to any organization. So these are the kind of questions you might ask yourself, maybe before you create a map, before you walk into a community, before you decide to do a 3-year plan or a 5-year, 25-year plan, right? So here are examples of types of questions. You know, I wonder if it might be easier if you think of one aspect of your work. And as we go through these questions, see if these questions apply. I don't know, maybe think about around community engagement or making decisions. Pick your own, right? So in that activity that you're doing, are you, especially if it impacts the community, how are you including and engaging the communities or organizations work with, right? So let's say you're working with homeless shelter because you need to be able to have input from homeless individuals. What is it that they would like to see happen? And so we are working with organizations that maybe are in the social work field. So how are we engaging all of these communities, right, in our work? Who has the power in this thing that I'm doing? Who has the power to allocate the resources? Do people in the community who are going to receive your plan and outcomes, are they allowed to allocate or have a voice around the resources? Who has the power to do that, right? Who is at the table and who is not when we're making these decisions? Sometimes we don't know who's not at the table because we all maybe look alike. So we don't know who's missing, right? So it's always, I want to say it's not a mystery in some ways to go try to find, you know, other places where this has worked. Let's say you're in a community where you are trying to increase people of color, you know, because you might say that your whole community is white, right? And you've tried reaching out here and there, you know, so maybe it might be that you go to a community, maybe, I don't know, Manchester, that where more people of color have moved in and have stayed, right? Ask the community members, what brought you to Manchester? What keeps you in Manchester? If you were to move into my community, what would bring you? What do we need to have to bring you there? Do you want to get high schoolers? Because we know young people are leaving communities, right? Start early with high schoolers. Ask them, what would make you stay here? What would keep you in our community? What do you need? So these are ways to engage the participants and engagements. So like the couples therapists, right? We just really need to hear from you and what it is that you want and need. Because if we don't know, what are we doing? Right? We're giving them what we think is best. But anyway, so those are some questions. So are the people from the community also in a decision-making role? If we bring community members to our planning, are they able to make decisions? Or are they just there to have input? All right. Next set of questions. So how will you modify or enhance your process to ensure outcomes reflect the strengths, wants, and needs of your community? Sometimes we create narratives for our communities. We will call them poor communities, where people have less education, bad health, right? And we name the communities those things. And yet, if we were to ask people in the community, who are you? They might say, we're very hardworking individuals who want an opportunity for our children to go to school, to have it. And so we sometimes provide that narrative, and we use it all the time with words that are less than, right? So how are we using the strengths of the community to identify them and name them? How would your community describe the impact of your outcomes on their lives? After you do something and you've put it out into the community, how would they describe the success of it or not? I know in some ways we do evaluations and we do feedback, right? But how has impacted their lives? This is my favorite one, the next one, besides who's at the table. How might your group or work potentially create, so your group produce any unintended barriers or consequences for the communities you work with? So sometimes our work does really good things, right? We might revive a community. We might bring in more restaurants and food access and, you know, sidewalks where people can walk, right? But when we do that, what is the unintended consequences of that? To do this, who loses? Right? So always look at who loses something, where are we creating greater barriers for people when we do this? And we know this with gentrification. We know some of the things that are happening, right? Where it has a benefit for a community, but in some ways it displaces a different community. And so how my group, you know, have these unintended, and if they have these unintended consequences, because they might, then how will you address these? Right? So it did have an impact on these people and you didn't mean it. It was just unintended. So do you have a plan to help that group or community get rid of that barrier? So these are just examples of questions that you ask yourself along the way. It's kind of like, I don't know if this is the way, but if you're deciding whether to buy a property or build a property, I am sure there's a checklist of things that you go through. Is it the right community? Is it the right time? Do we have? And so does the community want it? You know, and so this is it. This is just a checklist to keep us in line, to make sure we're always asking the questions that we need to ask. Does that make sense? So I'm just tossing these questions. We'll leave you with these questions. And I actually have a ready framework, and I think I also use it with other organizations, that on one side it is English and the other side is Spanish. So I think I'll send that to Matt. I'll make sure that Matt gives you that, because it has a couple other questions. And come up with it together. Come up with your partnerships and communities. So I want you to say this over and over. This is your mantra from now on. How, you know, nothing about us without us is for us. Nothing about us without us is really for us. I hear this many times when there's oh my God, what do you call these things? Protests. And just not that long ago, a community was protesting that they were trying to evict a woman of color. It's a very complicated situation. And the whole community, the people of color who were supporting her, were saying, chanting all together, nothing about us without us is for us. It's so powerful. But we have to think that way too. Would you want decisions made about where you live, how you live, where you buy your food, without having asked you any questions about it? Will it feel like it was really for you? Would you have really brought in, well, you might have brought in mangoes and, sweet plantains and green plantains, but maybe you might not have. People like to see their food. So that maybe some of the things that bring in people to a community is when they see things that reflect them. Anyway, so, what I would do, this comes to my end here, is like, so I don't know exactly all the steps that goes into planning, but what I would highly recommend is break down the categories of the type of work that you do. So I just guessed that these are, and I Google to see what parts of your work, but when preparing plans and studies, what kind of questions do you need to ask when you're there? When conducting inspections, what's missing? Who's not there? What questions are we not asking? What are we not seeing? Who needs to see this? Who's that pair of eyes? When preparing a site approval documents are full of language that excludes individuals, right? I look a lot sometimes at resumes because people are wanting to bring more people of color into their staff. And you look at the resumes and it requires, 15 years of professional education and 10 years experience doing this. And now, even though we want that, what we do know about systematic racism is that there's inequities in the way people have access to education. So if we're going to require that people have this degree and this, we are eliminating a group of people who didn't have that opportunity and are not going to be able to apply for that job. So how are we going to get more people of color in here? One, we have to have more access to education, but maybe we have to rethink some things. Not lower the standard in any kind of way, but how do we start bringing people in to our work? But when you coordinate with local governments, right? What groups are we leaving out, et cetera? I think you get the point here. And when meeting with public officials or the public to developing plans. And I go back to that survey. And when we ask questions of our community, make sure that the questions are done and created by the communities that are going to get the services, right? Because without us, for us, yeah, right? So without us, for us, without us, right? So the last one is just when recommending approval or denial of a proposal. What I would say in a group, in the next time you have your work group or you're together, try out some of these questions. Just you can start with a simple one. And maybe some of you are already doing this and there's more questions. Just ask, who's missing? What voice is not at the table? And sometimes it's really hard because if the voice is not on the table, we're not going to know, right? It's until the person comes in and all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, we did not make this inclusive for people who are hard of hearing, right? Because there wasn't a person who was hard of hearing in the room who had to say, I can't hear, right? We can't wait for that person to come because we put the burden of them on them to be the speaker for all people, right? So, and the only other recommendation is bring people of color or bring diverse individuals in groups of 2. Don't invite one person of color or a Black person or Indigenous person, immigrant, to a table to make decisions and have them be the only one. We found out from research that if there's just one other person of color in that meeting, it is much less stressful for both individuals. All right. Time. All right. So the rest of this, I'm going to just walk you through it, but here's some resources just to get you started. I brought here some of the things to keep in mind when you're talking about ready conversations, to keep in mind for others, for the people in your audience. Here, I put a list of things to keep in mind for yourself when you're doing and conducting conversations around ready. Here, maybe some of you know this work, but in doing this presentation, I came across this and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And so in this site, people have submitted essays about what it's like to live in, an urban town or urban city, or what it's like for inclusion. And it's just people writing essays who live in those communities and are affected by everything in the community. And it's so heartfelt, right? So it's a way that people are talking about the experience, lived experience of being in these communities, but in essays, in creative ways, right? Anyways, beautiful. I don't know about background, so I don't know who actually initiated, but it looks like amazing. Some of the stories are amazing. You haven't seen this video, watch this video. You want to have a meeting and think about like, okay, I don't want to talk about it, but I want the group to have a conversation. Do this talk, put her film on, listen to it yourself. I love The Gardener's Tale. Love it. Listen to it. Please go see it in a movie near you on your computer. So just thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for walking through this process, for being patient. So any questions? I'm going to stop the share.
So I just encourage folks to enter their questions in the chat. As we said before, please just feel free to speak up. Obviously, we're in a small enough group, and I think we're comfortable. We can raise some questions. Sara, I just want to start off with one, and it may be a challenging one to answer right now, but obviously from a racial perspective, in many of the communities in New Hampshire, it's challenging to determine whether or measure success in the outreach that we're doing as part of our planning processes and our regulatory processes. Are there any tips or tricks that you would encourage for us, because we sometimes lack that racial diversity, that you would use so we can not feel better about ourselves in the process, but actually measure whether or not we're doing the right things in the context of the ready concepts?
In order to bring in like more diverse individuals.
That's right. Particularly when we lack some of that racial diversity, how do we effectively measure other types of diversity that we're bringing into our processes?
Right. Well, I'm glad you're saying racial, because when I brought up the diversity, if we want to, even our own all white communities have a ton of diversity, right? If you look at low socioeconomic status, you look at higher, there's diversity. There's people of different learning abilities, all of that. So if you're defining diversity, even diversity of perspectives, they're there in the white communities, right? If you want to get people of color, I would recommend, and I think I might have briefly said this before, is to go to the communities that people have been able to do it successfully. Ask them, where did you start? Where did you reach out to? How did you change your community to make it more welcoming? Ask the communities you're trying to invite, what would you like to see in our community when you come? What's important to you? So, when I grew up, in my family, we lived in when we first moved, we lived in this rental place that was really not a great part of town. And a developer thought, why don't we build a barrio, a 12 houses in this one community, in this one subdivision, or whatever, part of Florida where there was nothing but dust and alligators, right? So they went out there and they built these 12 houses, and it was so they put 12 Spanish-speaking first-generation families, like immigrant, beautiful. People had a community immediately when they moved in. That was a long time ago, right? But it was immediate community. But we now know, of course, we didn't have food access. We didn't have transportation. We spent all our time on buses and long walks to get the bus, but we had great schools. and we had support, we had family. So I always think of that as whoever that developer was, whoever those planners were, I want to thank you. But the other piece is it took a long time, and the neighborhood did not want the budget. They came with their bats and swinging things and throwing things and running over grass for years until at some point it stopped. So that's an example. There's different ways to maybe be able to bring people. I always say, talk to the people that you're wanting to bring in. Why do they not move to the city you're talking about? What keeps them from moving there? Those are the barriers. Okay. So if I talk long enough, I won't get any more questions.
Well, I think I know others may have questions. I just have one quick follow-up, and sort of it's an ignorant one, I think, and that is, many of the things that we're trying to do today from a housing perspective are sort of center around the idea of mixing a diversity of people into housing developments, subdivisions, multifamily housing developments, rather than segregating, if you will, based on age or income or the like. But something interesting that I think you're saying is, or something that I'm thinking about, is it's really tough to walk that line between wanting to honor the cultural connections that certain groups of individuals might have and the proximity that they may want to have to each other, but also trying to ensure that that diversity is there and it really is sort of a nice community. So it's not really more of a comment more than anything. I think some of those principles work against each other, respecting cultural connections and also ensuring that we have sort of diverse developments of people. I think that's a really big challenge for us planners. I'm not sure if anyone else has any thoughts on that, but it's something that I'm thinking about as I listen to the presentation today. It's a fine line to walk.
It isn't. I'm hearing that when I did that thing on inclusion, that it is inclusion. We're giving everybody an opportunity to live in a safe place with access to food and education and all other things.
Yep,
right? It said worked really well with elderly people and younger people living together in the same environment. Has been a wonderful combination, right? It is inclusion.
Sarah, one of the other questions that we got was whether or not there are any other resources or books that you would recommend other than White Fragility. And two recommendations that were made are The Color of Law and Caste.
Both.
Do you have any others that you would recommend to the members here?
I do. So I just want to say thank you, Stacy, for putting The Color. Oh no, is that, I don't know who mentioned it.
That was Stacy.
Okay, Stacy. The Color of Law. You know how earlier I was talking about we have to sort of understand the history in order to really sort of understand. That's such a good book for understanding how we got to the place that we are, especially around systematic racism and institutional racism. And the other one, there's so many good ones. I have a pile of books, so many of them. I know there's one, and I can't speak to how, one that I heard about was Waking Up White, I think. It doesn't have a lot of practical skills, but it helps people who are just easing into this work. Matt, why don't I have a list of other resources where I have listed things, that books, articles. I've listed museums that are great. Virtually is a great time to see these things. TED Talks, videos. Why don't I send you that and you can send it out to the group?
That sounds great. I can do that. Any other questions from members? We have about 15 minutes left in the agenda today. I'm not sure if anyone else has something they'd like to ask. Welcome any questions.
Matt, I'll jump in for a question for Sarah. When you were talking about coming up with the ready framework and developing those questions, do you have any advice for planners if we were to obviously everyone that's here recognizes that this is important. But if we were ever to run into a situation where we would bring this to, whether it's the governing body of our community, or a board, or a commission, or whomever. And their response is, why are we talking about this? We're New Hampshire, we're homogenous, we're white. This isn't an issue here. We don't see the same value. And so in order for planners to not be discouraged, or for that work to not just fall by the wayside, do you have any either advice or recommendations on how to handle a scenario of that, where that might happen? So I guess I'm just looking to see if you've got any thoughts, so things don't just kind of filter out. If you've got some momentum, but then you get to a certain point where you get that response, what are your thoughts or any advice?
Right, and this is part of the problem with this work, right? We eventually get frustrated and we hit so many no's that it just sometimes feels like it's, a lost cause. I think you're right about, running into organizations or places that are not using a ready lens. I think so. I don't know if this is the case, but let's say your organization who's about to meet with city government or the government, right? I'm hoping that the government especially has had training on some of this stuff. And so you have an option. Do you want to educate this individual? Do you want to tell them a little bit about why it's important? You could do the education piece of it. Just make sure that it's not a person of color or a Black person who is having to constantly educate people. Because from what I know, people are tired. They want white people to join them in calling people out and educating people. And so the other piece is, I don't know if this is possible for you, but if your organization sets up values and a mission statement around which ready is a primary value that the organization is going to support, then in some ways you say, well, this is the way we prioritize what we're doing. And so the use of these questions is important for us, is part of who we are. And so it may be that, I hope I'm answering your question, but the other person might not. And we have to meet people where they're at. That person's not there, right? You hope maybe that they'll attend a workshop or do something. I also have found out that people I would say to you, to not get so frustrated, go with the coalition of the willing, right? Don't focus on the people who say no and can't do it. Well, however you need to get to that work, to get what it is that you need, you do it. However, the compromise, negotiation, whatever it is. But if enough people start to do ready, then we want to go with the people who are willing to do it. Ignore the naysayers, because if you can, because eventually when they see what's happening, they'll want to be with the people where the momentum is. So a lot of time spending over here trying to fix 2 or 3 is a lot of energy. We know where that gets us. Burnout too. So stick with, and I understand, and I'm sorry, I don't recall your name, but I really do understand the challenge of that, and how frustrating it is to come in with some wonderful solutions and not have somebody else be willing to do it or understand it or push it away. And this is part of the work.
Sarah, we had an interesting question. It's a challenging one, I think, but a very good one for us.
No, I hope I don't lose connection.
No, it's a tough one, but it's, we recognize, I think, many of us, that we have groups missing from our boards, our elected bodies. But the question is, how do we actually do outreach to get them engaged, right? How do we go to them and engage them in the process? When typically a lot of our governmental processes, frankly, are not accessible as they are today. We might argue they're more so in a virtual format than they were before with in-person meetings, I think. But do you know of any creative examples or methods that we could use to do outreach to some of these communities that may be a bit more vulnerable or not as engaged in the process traditionally in the past?
To, to get them to join your board, your group, or whatever it might be.
I think more so the elected and appointed bodies within the communities that we work in, the folks who are, going back to your point, making the decisions and really do wield the power in the process. How do we get them there?
You
Solve
so-
that one, please. It's
so what-
tricky.
Yeah, I'm sorry, the time has run out.
That's okay.
But no, so I guess the first thing is when you try to reach somebody from a community, I hope, and it's easier to have somebody from the community talking to them and not somebody from the outside, right? So get somebody who is willing to do this for you, who knows the community, knows what their needs, and can be part of the search. I know a lot of boards or other, in decision-making situations, ask other government or associations or other, like, if it's close enough, can that person with that person be willing to also serve on our team? When you're looking at people to invite to, we can't go to the Rolodex, yeah, that ages me, but the Rolodex, and go through our friends. We know this. Some of the most successful attempts I have seen people do is call out the professional organizations. There are Latino organizations, there are African American associations, there's so many associations, maybe not right there in that community, but somewhere in New Hampshire. And now that we have virtual, there wouldn't be any reason you couldn't have people who are in decision-making positions who can be part of that. Because once you start getting a few, it becomes inclusive. So when somebody comes, they're going to see that it's important to you. They see people like themselves. They see that you've maybe put it in 2 different languages. It starts the ball rolling. The word gets around. To a win-win. They get involved in making decisions and you get more people. So those are just some ideas.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, we're going through a comprehensive planning process in Nashville right now. And one of the things, and I think we all know this already, but rather than inviting 1 or 2 representatives of all of these groups to convene in one room together, we need to make a conscious effort to go to those communities as a group where they feel comfortable expressing their opinions. And I think you made a really interesting point earlier, and that is not assuming the questions that we know, or not assuming that we know the questions to ask, really relying on these diverse groups to provide us with feedback as we form the questions, and even asking specific targeted questions that may help create the feedback that we're looking for in the process. I think that's really critical. We can't have a one-size-fits-all to outreach in any planning process that we do. So I think that's really good advice.
I also want to remind you that, some communities are not trusting for right reasons, for the right reasons. And so, because sometimes some communities feel like you take a lot from us, you take our numbers, you take our blood, you take our thing or whatever, but nothing comes back to our community, So you discovered this cure and then it goes off to somebody else. So a lot of them feel like there's a lot of taking and not giving back to. And so it's a partnership. And that's why I say, try to invite somebody from that community to go into that community to sort of alleviate some of that trust.
Okay.
And not as a genuine community member.
Okay, that's great. Any other last minute questions before we wrap up with Sara today? And again, please, if you have anything after the session, please feel free to throw it in the chat box until it's closed, or reach out to me individually, and I'll certainly share the presentation slides from today and a list of some of the resources that Sara referenced. But any last minute questions before we end today's session? Okay, Shanna, I'll pass it off to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarah. That was an amazing presentation. It sounds like, I know even how hard it is to engage over these virtual platforms, but I can see, you know, the New Hampshire planners are engaged in this, and we hope to see you back. Absolutely.
Thank you.
I do wonder too, we may be able to put some of this information up on our website too. So folks, if you are interested, you can look up on our website. So in closing, I just want to thank everyone for attending. This was great. We had, I think, at our peak here, close to 50 folks attending this meeting. So that's fabulous. A few things just to leave you on. We will be looking for a new executive committee member. Please, if you're interested, please reach out to us. The legislative subcommittee meeting on the 16th of December. So please join us if you're interested in that. And we will be getting you information about our new social media platforms probably after January, once the new EC meets and kind of reorganizes and we figure out who's in what position. So once you see those, please friend us. Please friend us. And that's it. Thank you, everyone, so much. And again, a round of applause for Sarah. That was amazing.
Oh,
It was.
I heard you say you're bringing in a new executive member, a committee member. What a great opportunity.
Absolutely.
to start
Absolutely.
with Who,
Fantastic.
what voice do we need? And have we outreached enough people to really get the diversity we want at that table? So
Yeah, what a great thought.
awesome. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much.
Thank you. All right. Have a nice
Okay.
holiday.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. Have a great day.